Rockford's home for classic rocks, 96.7 The Eagle. Special guest joining me today, legendary guitar player, member of Genesis, member of GTR, a great solo career, Steve Hackett. How you doing this morning, Steve?
Very well. Nice to talk to you. Thank you.
You got a new album coming out in 2019, At the Edge of Light. It's got to be pretty exciting to start out the new year like that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a very exciting album. I had a great time making it. We had lots of people on it, maybe 20 people or so, from all over the world. So it's a rock album, but it also has world music aspects. It's global. It's comprehensive. A lot of people on it who are really, really, really great on it, I have to say. Lots of great performances.
When you got that many guests and musicians, how is it to piece that together? Is it quite the task, or is it something you're used to and you can do it pretty easily?
Well, sometimes I work with people face to face, but with the core band is face to face. And then we get people in like the sitar player Shima, and the tar player from Azerbaijan, Malik Mansurov. I've worked with those people face to face, but other people send performances in the post, so to speak. It's beam me up, Scotty. So you get a drum performance from Nick DeVigilio, or something sent in from, as I said, Azerbaijan or from Iceland, and we coordinate it all in sunny downtown Teddington in England, and that's the way it really works. So, yeah, it's intimate, but it's also remote as well.
Having that opportunity with technologies these days, because in the past, you'd have to fly a musician in from Iceland, and of course, that's costly. But to be able to do that, it's really one of the benefits of technology today.
Well, it is, and a lot of people work this way. I work a lot with other people. I've shown up on a lot of people's albums, as a guest. And invariably, they send me something which I get to work on, whenever I'm ready. And so it means whatever you send back, no one is pouring over your shoulder. So by the time you've figured out the changes and what it needs, what you give them back is, near as damn it a perfect performance. And that's what I've had from other people. But we've got a couple of girls on the album, the Soul Sisters. The McBroom sisters, who sing famously with Pink Floyd, and I met them on these rock and roll cruises that go around the Caribbean. I've been doing those for a while, usually one each year, and they said they'd like to work together, and they were absolutely marvelous, of course, because as I said, they worked with Floyd and Tom Lord Alge and friends such as Dave Kurtzner, and yeah, they're really, really great. They're on the track called Underground Railroad, and the singing on that is second to none.
I'm talking to Steve Hackett. He's got a new album coming out on January 25th called At the Edge of Light. Now, when you're bringing in all the different musicians and stuff, how does it affect the chemistry? Does it take a little bit longer to get that chemistry going for the album and with the musicians?
Well, I think it took us about 18 months. And now that wasn't 18 months straight. I was doing shows in between and working at it and then coming back to it. It takes a while, but it's quite nice to be able to work on one or two tracks and then have a break and strip it all down and have time to write something else. So I actually quite like working piecemeal like this. It's different if you're in a band and everyone's writing and everyone's kicking in with ideas, but it takes me a little bit of time to amass my stuff. So I've got books of ideas, and the ones that still surface, the ones that seem like they stand out to you, I work on those. I sketch them out on computer first of all, and then we involve humans and try and have as many humans as possible on the album.
It seems like you really embrace the technology part of making music.
I do, yeah. I mean, for instance, I was doing something recently, and I was using an amp. It had a great sound, but it was a little bit buzzy and hissy especially when the lights were on, and then the engineer I was working with said, "Why don't I try and get up something similar?" So he, in some kind of amp simulation mode, he got up something like an orange amp with a tube screamer in front of it, all virtual, of course, and you can move the mic virtually as well, how close you want it to the cabinet. And, you know, it was exactly the same sound, except that it was super clean, so I didn't have to clean up between phrases. You see what I mean?
Oh, yeah. You have the opportunity to do that these days. What's the pros and cons of working as a solo artist as opposed in a band situation?
Well, I think if you're a megalomaniac, being a solo act is probably the only way to go. But having said that, you know, there's no such thing as a solo album. It's always a team that builds it. So the teams that built the Genesis albums and the GTR stuff, it's the same for me. My name goes on the front of the package, but I'm working with a number of people, a number of great performances from people who are fantastic, such as Jonas Reingold, who plays with the Flower Kings, but he's a fabulous bass player. And I've worked with some greats. I've worked with John Wetton. I've worked with Chris Squire. I've worked with some hugely influential bass players, all of whom were fabulous. But I have to say that Jonas's work on this particular album is probably about the best I've heard.
I'm talking to Steve Hackett. You talk about your time in Genesis, and recently you've gone back and you've revisited those albums and that time in Genesis. What was that like to be able to go back and relive those times?
Well, I've done a couple of revisited albums, but I've done many revisited tours. So what I've been doing in recent years is I do about half and half. So we have half the show is my stuff, and then we have the other half, the Genesis stuff. And so next year we will be touring in the States, even though the dates haven't been announced yet. We'll be doing the whole of the album we did in 1973, which was Selling England by the Pound. I'm doing the whole album for the first time since 1973. At that time, John Lennon said that we were one of the bands that he was listening to. And we could hardly get a gig in the States at that time. You know, you have to remember that he was also, you know, fighting possible extradition and all of that. So, this is, it was a very fruitful year, and I'm very proud to do that album, plus the whole of Spectral Mornings as well, which is a fan's favorite of mine, plus stuff from the new one. So we'll feature stuff from 3 albums, and we'll try and do as many things in their entirety as we can. We do about 2.5 hours on stage. I've just done the Genesis stuff, a selection of Genesis things, an 8-day tour with an orchestra up and down the UK. So we had a sellout with that, and that'll also be released, a product late next year. That'll be out.
And that's the other thing I've noticed about your work. Boy, you release a lot of good things for the fans, a lot of live stuff, a lot of multiple formatic stuff. It's a lot of work, but the fans got to be excited about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's not really work for me. I mean, you know, music is my passion. It is the oxygen I breathe, and I know it's important to a lot of your listeners, too. Music is very good medicine for people who are you know, maybe not so fortunate, who might be sick, especially at this time of year. I just had a friend who was seriously injured in the Paris riots. I don't know if you know about all that stuff, where they were tearing up the cobblestones again. Sounded like the French Revolution all over again. Anyway, my friend, who is a lady in the fashion business, was seriously hurt, and I'm going to see her tomorrow and give her a copy of this album before it's released, so that she's got it there as some comfort, you know. She's looking forward to that. So, music is good medicine. It really is. It's the subtext is that it doesn't just make you feel better. It can sometimes put you back on your feet.
When I'm feeling down or feeling bad, I go back and listen to some of my favorite music. It makes you feel better.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, you know, when I was a lovelorn teenager, listening to blues was hugely important to me, either live or on record, and I lived every word, you know. Have you ever loved a woman? All of that stuff. It was hugely important for me. In fact, I was just talking to someone about Paul Butterfield and Mike Bloomfield, who were incredibly influential players. And Butterfield was this extraordinary harmonica player, and talking about them being inducted posthumously into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. That happened fairly recently. As part of Genesis, I was inducted in 2010. Extraordinary, the same night that ABBA were being inducted, and Jimmy Cliff, and various other people. It's great that people get celebrated, even if they might no longer be with us. Sometimes it's writers as well as performers.
I'm talking to Steve Hackett. He's got a new solo album coming out in January called At the Edge of Light. In your time in Genesis, obviously the band evolved, but did you see that it would turn into what it became?
Well, I think that I'd done 2 albums with the band, and then by 1973, we had this kind of quantum leap forward where technically suddenly we were able to pull things off that other bands hadn't yet done. So that involved technically stuff like tapping and sweep picking and octave jumps and that kind of stuff. So it was a favorite album for me, and the fact that even though we couldn't get any gig in between New York and L.A. at that time, as I say, John Lennon had just given this interview and said we were one of the bands that he was listening to, and so I was hugely proud of that, and I know Peter Gabriel was at the time, and so that was a feather in our cap, and a bit like, don't give up, you've got to be a bit like Nelson, see no ships, you mustn't let your disasters stop you, you've just got to keep going until people cotton on to you, so you've got to be very tenacious in this business, I think.
When you look back at the time at GTR, the album you made with Steve Howe, what was the experience like? Because that was really part of that MTV world.
We just happened to produce an album and a video where they were showing it on the hour, and at that time, Clive Davis was working with Arista Records, and he'd had a huge success with Whitney Houston, who I met at the time, who was extraordinarily sweet and lovely and talented and very, very modest. And, she is a great loss, no doubt about that. But Clive did a fabulous job at that time. He's one of the people of, one of the shakers and movers of the industry, along with other notables like Ahmet Ertegun, who I'd got to work with. It's one or two people can make decisions that change the lives of so many, not just artists, but someone has to give the green light to a situation at some point before that favorite artist of yours and the very record that you hold in your hand. These key moments, the tipping points. Sometimes it's just one person's belief, someone who's in a position to be able to change lives.
It's interesting that you say that, because there are so many great projects and musicians out there that don't get the opportunity because they might not have the right person there to give them the support and the push that they deserve.
I think so, yeah. I think there's a famous phrase, if I could remember it, but it's got to do with, something like opportunity bisected by application is the thing that the rest of us call it luck, but actually, if you keep coming back to the tables, that's the only way that on the great roulette wheel of life, your dice is going to land on the right number, the lucky number, but you've got to keep playing the tables. You've got to keep knocking on doors. I advertised myself for 5 years before I got a phone call from Peter Gabriel. Met all sorts of musicians along the way, but every week I was advertising in the back pages of a magazine which no longer exists, but so many British bands were formed off the back pages. Led Zeppelin, Queen, the Stones. They all found their missing members via that magazine, which was called Melody Maker. So it only took me 5 years. But I didn't give up, so That's what you got to do.
The new album, At the Edge of Light, coming out in 2019. What else do you have to look forward to in the new year?
Well, as I say, I've got this tour, which is selling England by the pound. We'll be doing that in its entirety, and as much as Spectral Mornings as we can, plus at the Edge of Light. I'm doing that. I'm also doing an autobiography at the moment, and other than that, a number of projects that I'm working on, and then eventually they come out. I do a lot of acoustic guitar work as well as the songs that are on the new album, which is mainly electric. So I like to get involved with as many genres as possible. So it's been a pan-genre approach for quite some time. So I'm the busiest I've ever been. I've got about 160 shows lined up next year. I'm going to be living out of a suitcase quite seriously for much of the year.
Now, do you like touring?
I love touring, yes. I love it. It's a great life if you don't weaken, as they say. If you're tired, you're not going to enjoy it. So try and get some rest whenever you can, even if it's just falling asleep in the back of a vehicle or a plane or whatever it is. But you have to be very flexible. But I think the crowd is what gives you the energy. They give you the get up and go. I live for it.
Steve, thank you so much for taking the time today. If people are looking for you on the internet and stuff, where's the best place to look for you?
Well, that would be hackettsongs.com. That's the website. You can get me on that, okay?
Steve Hackett, thanks so much for joining me. The album At the Edge of Light will be out on January 25th, and look for him out on tour in 2019. It's Rockford's Home for Classic Rock, 96.7 The Eagle.